welcome back, and thank you for staying tuned. But if you're just joining us, you are in time with me. This evening is Dr. JENDAYI Frazer, who is currently a professor at the Carnegie Mellon's University in the United States and formerly a U.S. diplomat, the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs during the President Bush's time. And she's just telling us a little bit about her thoughts for the ICC. And before we took the break, you were telling us about your reasons why you feel the Kenyan cases should be dismissed at the ICC. And I want to move quickly forward and look at the Kenyan Parliament. If you're aware, there was a motion that was passed with the intention to bring a bill for Kenya to withdraw from the ICC. Do you think this is valid? Do you think this is the direction we should be taking as a country?
Well, normally I don't really judge the decisions of a country in terms of its domestic politics. But what I would say is that I think not only the Kenyan Parliament, but African countries as a whole should consider leaving the ICC. And I know that that is a statement that makes many uncomfortable because, as I said, there was such an effort to get the ICC in place as a global institution. And it's not easy. The type of mobilization and diplomatic work that's required to bring about a new international institution of governance is no joke, and so you can't take lightly the idea of dismissing it. But again, unless the ICC changes course, reforms itself significantly, and I see no evidence of that in the way in which the Office of the Prosecutor and the prosecutor herself is behaving right now, then I think that there really should be consideration of getting rid of this institution and starting over, just moving it out of the way. Maybe there should be a criminal court for Africa. Maybe the Europeans should have their criminal court. And really, because justice should be served closer to the people, and for it to be sitting in The Hague. Even though the judges are international, even the prosecutor is now an African. But the way in which it's carried out its mandate has not been universal. It hasn't been fair, and I think about the League of Nations, and it had to be moved for the United Nations because it wasn't an institution that worked, and so sometimes if an institution is fundamentally flawed. And that's a judgment that I'm not making about the ICC, but I'm getting close to saying that, in my view, it's a fundamentally flawed institution. Then get rid of it and get a new one.
Isn't that a bit radical, a bit extreme when you say pull out as a whole?
Well, no, it's not extreme to say pull out because that's the recourse. It's somewhat radical to say it's fundamentally flawed because no one has tried from this point to reform it. And so until you try to reform it, then I can't say that it's fundamentally flawed. But if it doesn't seek a path of reform, and it should start with the Kenya cases because they're just unjustified, then perhaps, if in other words, if there's a chauvinism about we're going to keep the ICC the way it is, and we're going to continue to go after these, I don't know what one would call, there's this sort of general dismissal of African leaders, that they're all unaccountable. This blanket brush that they're, painting that African leaders are unaccountable when, they're no better than rebels. And, when you're going to have that type of prejudice and you're not going to have a real process of selection of cases, and you don't reform it and you stay that course, then you're fundamentally flawed and everyone should consider actually withdrawing from the court.
All right, that brings me to the issue about many Kenyans, many leaders we've seen the AU, the East African Legislative Assembly, the Kenyan Parliament, and many people just asking President Uhuru Kenyatta not to attend his summons, the start of his trial in the ICC. Yes. What do you think of that?
Well, that's a difficult one for me. I can completely understand the sentiment that President Kenyatta should not go to The Hague. And certainly when the African Union leaders have essentially told him not to go to The Hague, then, I think he has to pay attention to that. I certainly think he has to pay attention to that, but I also think that that sort of forces the issue in a very fundamental way. I'm sad that from an international diplomatic perspective that we've gotten to this point. And it's mainly because African voices have been ignored, right? And the AU has been petitioning and talking about this process being unfair for a very long time, and they've just simply been, their voices have been ignored. And so now they're at a point where they're taking this hard position. And so I guess I would have to say I understand it. I know that it's going to make the diplomacy a lot more difficult for the West, but in many ways we've put ourselves in this position.
All right. I know you are a fighter against impunity, and you're also now saying we do not want the ICC. How do you explain the two? It will sort of seem like on one hand you're saying let's fight impunity, on the other hand let's sort of promote impunity by not listening to the ICC.
Well, I don't think that the ICC is a court that has anything to do with impunity. I think the ICC is a court that has everything to do with global politics. So that's the first thing. Let's not conflate the institution of the ICC with justice or ending impunity. It hasn't carried out that role. Secondly, I think that the way in which you deal with impunity is to the degree that you can along a principle of as close to the victim as possible. And so the first court of call should be national, right? It should be local and it should be national. And that way you actually have a process in which that victim and its institutions are responsive, and hopefully those institutions will mature and evolve and develop so that they stop impunity, for the long term. So first national. Secondly, I would say regional. That's why I'm saying that there needs to be an African criminal court to judge these cases, to select between these cases. Then I would go to that type of hybrid court like you have with the Special Court for Sierra Leone, which is a Sierra Leonean court that has a UN mandate, right? The one that Charles Taylor was actually convicted on. People often mistakenly think that he was convicted through the ICC. He wasn't. So then I would go to those type of hybrid courts. The International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, for example, is another one, or Yugoslavia is another one. And then after that, I would look at if there's such a thing as an ICC and whether it's necessary. I would rather not have it be a necessary institution by building and strengthening national institutions.
All right. We do expect the UN Security Council to sort of address this issue, given that the AU has since presented a petition citing some of the issues, of course, is the regional security on why these cases should be deferred. And you've talked about the diplomatic sort of standoff, if I could use the international diplomatic standoff. How do you think they would vote if they were to vote, the 5 permanent members? How do you think they would vote? Do you think they would support the petition by the AU, or they're likely to vote against it and say these cases must continue at the ICC, irrespective of these issues that have been raised, the security challenge, the fact that now Kenya can talk about having reforms, and of course the peaceful, quiet environment that is currently prevailing? Well,
I think of the 5 members, China and Russia will vote in support of the AU petition. Certainly, they'll support a vote in support. I think the United States would often just try to get out of it and abstain. And I think France and the UK have been some of the countries that have manipulated the court. And so I think it's going to be very difficult. But I think they have a choice. They either accept the AU's petition and save the court for another day, or they lose the court. Because I think if they don't accept the AU's petition, then you're going to start seeing countries move to leave the ICC. And so it could be the death of the ICC. And so the smart thing for them, and mind you, they were voting for a deferral for the case in Sudan, right? I mean, if you look at the permanent 5, China certainly wanted to defer the case against al-Bashir. Russia also went along with that, probably more on principle that it doesn't believe in the ICC in the first place. The UK and France wanted to vote for deferral, and it was only the United States that said it would veto if they tried to defer the case against Sudan. And in the case of Sudan, you look at Darfur and the hundreds of thousands of people who died in Darfur. If you look at South Sudan and the 26-year war that took place, more than 2 million people had died in that war. If you're prepared to defer a case on Sudan, then certainly you would do the same for Kenya.
I want to talk about the Kenya-US relations. We have been good partners for quite some time, and I just sort of want to pick your brains, given that I know you don't sit in government right now, but
Yes.
you have been there, so you must have an idea of how probably things work. And I want to go back to the visit that we had President Barack Obama visit Africa just recently, and one of the reasons why he did not come to Kenya, of course, had a lot to do with the fact that the president and the deputy president have cases at the ICC. Do you see that changing, you know, his perception of how he deals with Africa and our relations with the US, and also given now they have to make a decision on whether they are supporting Kenya or not?
Right. Well, I actually think President Obama has a more complicated policy towards Africa in general and towards Kenya as well. And I'm not so certain that he would have come to Kenya even if there wasn't this issue of the ICC hangover. I'm not so sure he would have come to Kenya. I think there are a lot of factors that go into selecting the countries. Some of those factors have to do with where the president has already gone before and what the Secret Service thinks is a manageable place to go to. You know, and so they've gone to Tanzania. They know Tanzania. You know, it's a very easy place for the U.S. Secret Service. So I think some of that had to do with those type of calculations. But certainly the issue of the ICC and how the United States wants to posture itself. But remember, the United States is not a member of the ICC. And the United States is always visiting countries that we think have had massive human rights violations. Let's take China, for example. You know, we don't have any problems with engaging with the leadership of China, even Russia for that matter. We have no problems. Let's take Saudi Arabia. You know, I could just name names, countries, even ourselves. We've had our own problems, you know, historically and currently. And so I think that it's not putting America's interest to the forefront for the administration to take a distant position from Kenya. And I don't think it's that distant, actually. I think that the United States, and particularly the Obama administration, understands how important Kenya is to the United States from the point of view, certainly, of regional stability, but also from the point of view of Kenya's role in East Africa and the size of its economy and the importance of its society and the closeness of that society to the United States. Many Kenyans are in the United States, many Americans are in Kenya. And so I think the